The sunset painted orange streaks across the sky as Agent Anthony Reynolds drove his sleek black sedan down the empty highway. His eyes burned from staying awake for nearly 2 days straight. The surveillance job had gone well, better than expected, but now all he wanted was a hot shower and his bed. The rhythmic hum of tires on asphalt nearly lulled him into a trance. He rolled down the window, letting the cool evening air slack his face. Just 20 more miles to go. He adjusted the rearview mirror and rubbed his tired eyes. That's when he saw them, red and blue lights flashing in the distance behind him. Anthony checked his speedometer. He was going 5 over the limit, nothing that usually attracted attention. Not now, he muttered, easing the car onto the shoulder. He took a deep breath and ran through the options in his head. His real identification was locked in a secure facility downtown. The only ID he carried was his cover, Alex Rodriguez, security consultant for Westlake Industries. The police cruiser pulled up behind him, headlights bright in his mirrors. Anthony watched as a young officer stepped out, adjusted his belt, and approached cautiously, one hand hovering near his holster. Standard procedure, but it still made Anthony tense up. "Evening, sir," said Officer Mike Taylor, shining his flashlight briefly into the car before directing it slightly away, just enough to see but not blind. "License and registration, please." Anthony nodded, movements deliberate and slow. "Good evening, officer. Can I ask why I was pulled over?" "You were doing 60 in a 55, and you drifted over the line twice in the last mile." Officer Taylor's voice was professional but had an edge to it. "Have you been drinking tonight?" "No, sir. Just tired. Coming back from a business trip." Anthony reached for the glove compartment, again moving slowly. "My registration is in here." The officer tensed slightly. "Just take it out carefully, please." Anthony nodded, retrieving the documents and his wallet. As he pulled out his license, he felt a twinge of worry. The cover ID was solid. It would pass routine checks, but something about this officer seemed thorough, like he had something to prove. Officer Taylor examined the license with his flashlight. "Security consultant?" "Yes, sir. Corporate security assessments." "You look exhausted," Taylor noted, studying Anthony's face. "Where are you coming from?" Anthony weighed his answer carefully. "Philadelphia. 3-day job setting up new security protocols for a client." The officer handed back the license but kept the registration. "Mind if I run this real quick?" "Not at all." As Taylor walked back to his cruiser, Anthony checked his phone. No messages from his handler. He took another deep breath and adjusted his rearview mirror to watch the officer. Inside the police car, Taylor was typing into his computer. Anthony knew what he'd find. The car registered to Westlake Industries, a legitimate but obscure company that served as a CIA front for certain operations. Nothing that would raise immediate red flags. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Anthony's training kept him calm outwardly, but his mind raced. Extended checks sometimes meant trouble. Finally, Officer Taylor returned, face more serious than before. He handed back the registration, but didn't immediately step away from the window. "Mr. Rodriguez, the car's registration checks out, but we've had reports of vehicles matching this description involved in some activity up north." He studied Anthony's face. "Mind if I ask where you're headed?" Anthony maintained eye contact. "Home. Arlington. I've been away 3 days and just want to sleep in my own bed." Taylor nodded slowly. "Mind opening your trunk for me?" And there it was, the request Anthony had been dreading. His trunk contained nothing illegal, but it did hold specialized equipment that would be difficult to explain away as standard security consultant gear. "Is there a specific reason? Am I under suspicion of something?" Anthony asked, keeping his tone respectful but firm. Officer Taylor's hand moved slightly closer to his holster. "Just a routine check, sir. We've had some issues with trafficked goods on this highway." Before Anthony could respond, his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Checkpoint ahead. Status." The timing couldn't be worse. His handler was checking in, and now he had an officer wanting to search his vehicle. One wrong move could blow months of careful work, or worse. Anthony looked up at Officer Taylor, whose patience was visibly wearing thin. He needed to make a decision, and quickly. The day was about to get much longer than he planned. Anthony's mind raced as Officer Taylor stood waiting for an answer about searching the trunk. The air between them grew thick with tension. He needed a way out that wouldn't raise more suspicion. "Officer," Anthony said, his voice steady despite his exhaustion, "I understand you're just doing your job. But I've been awake for almost 2 days straight on this assignment. If there's a specific reason you need to search my vehicle, I'd like to know." Taylor studied Anthony's face, seeming to weigh his options. "Your car matches a description we received. Nothing definite, just something to check out." He paused, then added, "You seem nervous." "Not nervous," Anthony replied. "Just tired and wondering why a simple speeding stop turned into all this." The officer's radio crackled to life. A female voice came through. "Unit 447, what's your 20? We've got a situation at mile marker 67. Taylor reached for his radio without taking his eyes off Anthony. "This is 447. I'm at mile marker 58 with a traffic stop." "Copy that. When you're clear, we need backup at 67. Something shifted in Taylor's expression, a hint of reluctance to let this go, mixed with the pull of duty elsewhere. Anthony recognized an opportunity. "Listen," Anthony said, reaching slowly into his jacket pocket. Taylor tensed again, but Anthony pulled out a business card. "This is my supervisor at Westlake. If you have concerns, you can call him directly." The card was real, one of several safety measures built into his cover. The number would reach a CIA officer posing as a Westlake executive who could verify his cover story. Taylor took the card, examining it under his flashlight. "Thomas Wilson, Director of Operations. He'll confirm everything I've told you. I know it's late, but he expects calls any time an issue comes up. Company policy." The officer's radio crackled again, more urgently this time. Taylor sighed, tucking the card into his pocket. "I'm going to let you go with a warning about the speeding, Mr. Rodriguez. Drive carefully, especially if you're tired." His tone changed, becoming less official. "Look, find somewhere to pull over if you need to. Driving exhausted can be as dangerous as driving drunk." Anthony nodded. "I appreciate that, Officer Taylor. I'll be careful." As Taylor walked back to his cruiser, Anthony felt the tension drain from his shoulders, but he knew this wasn't over. The officer had been suspicious enough to want to search the car and had kept the business card. Once the police cruiser pulled away, Anthony waited a full minute before starting his engine. He reached for his phone and called a secure number. "This is Reynolds," he said when someone picked up. "I just had an encounter with local law enforcement. Officer Mike Taylor, badge number visible on his uniform, was 8294. He ran my plates and wanted to search the vehicle. Was your cover compromised?" The voice on the other end was calm but direct. "I don't believe so. He accepted the Westlake story, but he took Tom's card. Might be nothing, might be something." "Understood. Did he photograph any documents?" "No, just standard procedure, but he mentioned reports of vehicles matching this description involved in activity up north. That language seems specific." There was a pause on the other end. "That's concerning. The Franklin operation hasn't been leaked to local police." Anthony frowned, pulling back onto the highway. Someone else might be using similar vehicles, or he didn't finish the thought. "Or we have a bigger problem," the handler completed. "Change your route home. Take the scenic way, make sure you're not followed. I'll have Tom ready in case this officer calls." "Copy that." Anthony ended the call and checked his mirrors. The highway stretched empty behind him, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Either that officer had been unusually thorough, or someone had flagged vehicles matching his description. 10 miles down the road, Anthony took an unexpected exit. If someone was looking for his car, he wouldn't make it easy for them. As he navigated back roads, his mind replayed the encounter. Officer Taylor's reluctance to let him go, the convenient radio call, the way he'd studied the business card, as if memorizing details. Anthony's phone buzzed with a text. "Check in when you reach secure location. Full debrief required." The quiet drive home had turned into something more complicated. Whatever was happening, he needed to stay alert despite his exhaustion. Years of training had taught him one thing above all others: coincidences rarely existed in his line of work. As he turned onto a winding country road, Anthony spotted headlights in his rearview mirror. They were far back, but they'd been there for 2 turns now. Coincidence? Or had Officer Taylor decided to follow up after all? Anthony gripped the steering wheel tighter as he watched the headlights in his rearview mirror. They maintained a steady distance, not too close, not too far, just present enough to be noticed. "Let's see if you're really following me," he muttered, turning onto a smaller side road without signaling. It was a basic counter-surveillance move, nothing fancy. If the car behind him was just a regular driver heading home, they'd continue straight. The headlights disappeared from his mirror. Anthony let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Maybe he was being paranoid after all. 2 days without sleep could make anyone jumpy. Then the lights reappeared, making the same turn he had. "Well, that answers that question," Anthony said, his training kicking in despite his exhaustion. He needed to know who was tailing him before heading to any safe location. Leading someone to a CIA facility was absolutely out of the question. He reached for his phone and pressed a single button. When it connected, he spoke clearly. "I've picked up a tail. Unknown vehicle, maintaining distance. Currently on Oakwood Lane heading west. Can you identify the vehicle?" His handler's voice was calm. "Not yet. I'm going to try." Anthony slowed down slightly, looking for a place where streetlights might illuminate the car behind him. "I'll call back." He spotted a gas station ahead, its bright lights creating a pool of visibility in the darkness. Perfect. Anthony signaled and pulled in, positioning his car at the pump but angling it so he could see the road. The following car slowed as it approached the gas station. In the harsh fluorescent light, Anthony finally got a clear look. It was Officer Taylor's police cruiser. Anthony pretended to get out and pump gas, using the movement to observe the cruiser as it drove slowly past the station. Taylor was alone in the vehicle, and he didn't try to hide his face as he looked directly at Anthony. But instead of pulling in, the cruiser continued down the road, turning at the next intersection. Anthony finished pumping a few gallons of gas he didn't need and went inside to pay, using the opportunity to check if Taylor had circled back. The parking lot remained clear. Back in his car, Anthony called his handler again. It was the same officer from the traffic stop. He drove by the gas station but didn't stop. There was a pause on the other end. That's unusual protocol for local police. Did he call the number on the card? "Unknown," Anthony replied, pulling back onto the road. "But he's taking an unusual interest." "Agreed. We need to know why. Tom hasn't received any calls, which makes this more concerning." His handler's voice became more serious. "Change of plans. We need to know more about this officer. Head to the drop point at Harper's Storage instead of home. You'll find equipment in locker 227. The code is today's date backward." Anthony nodded, even though no one could see him. "Copy that. ETA 20 minutes. He took a roundabout route to make sure he wasn't followed again. The night had grown darker, clouds hiding the moon and stars. His headlights cut through the darkness as he turned onto an industrial street lined with storage facilities and small warehouses. Harper's Storage was actually CIA-owned, disguised as a regular self-storage business. Anthony pulled around to the back entrance, used his keycard to enter through a service door, and quickly found locker 227. The code worked -03,212,024 backward for March 21, 2024. Inside the locker, he found a laptop, a small device for accessing police frequencies, and a file folder. Anthony opened the folder first. Inside was information on Officer Michael Taylor. The CIA had basic files on many law enforcement officers, nothing intrusive, just public record information collected as standard procedure. Taylor was 34 years old, 8 years on the force. Previously served in the Army, 75th Ranger Regiment. Honorably discharged after 2 tours in Afghanistan. Anthony stared at the page. Rangers. That explained the officer's alertness, his attention to detail. Military training never quite leaves you. When he opened the laptop, a message was waiting. "Run background check level 2 on Taylor. Authorization code in your phone." Anthony entered the code from the text message that appeared on his phone. The search began running, digging deeper than the basic file. As he waited, he switched on the police scanner. Within minutes, he heard Taylor's voice. "Unit 447 to dispatch. That vehicle from earlier. I need everything we have on Westlake Industries. Something doesn't feel right. A female dispatcher responded, "Copy that. Sending what we have to your terminal." Anthony's fingers moved quickly across the laptop keyboard, typing a message to his handler. "Officer actively investigating Westlake cover. Request immediate support." The response came back instantly. "Stand by. Incoming call." His phone rang seconds later. Anthony answered without speaking. "Reynolds, listen carefully," his handler said. "We've got a bigger problem." Taylor's search triggered an alert. He's not just a random officer, he's working with an FBI task force on something called Operation Lighthouse. They're investigating a weapons smuggling ring, and somehow your vehicle description got flagged in their system. Anthony felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "Are you saying my cover car is somehow connected to an FBI weapons case? That's what we need to find out fast, because right now, to Officer Taylor, you look like a suspect in his investigation." "So what's the play?" Anthony asked, already knowing the answer wouldn't be simple. "We have two options. Extract you completely, burn the Westlake cover, and start fresh elsewhere." Or, his handler paused. "Or," Anthony prompted, "or we approach Taylor directly. Interdepartmental cooperation. Tell him enough to clear you while learning what he knows." Anthony considered this. He's ex-military. Rangers. That might give us common ground. "Your call, Reynolds. You're on the ground." Anthony thought about the way Taylor had looked at him, professional but with a hint of something else, the recognition of someone who sensed a kindred spirit. Maybe there was a third option here, one that didn't involve running or risking an operation. "I think," Anthony said slowly, "we might be looking at this from the wrong angle." When he opened the laptop, a message was waiting. "Run background check level 2 on Taylor. Authorization code in your phone." Anthony entered the code from the text message that appeared on his phone. The search began running, digging deeper than the basic file. As he waited, he switched on the police scanner. Within minutes, he heard Taylor's voice. "Unit 447 to dispatch. That vehicle from earlier. I need everything we have on Westlake Industries. Something doesn't feel right." A female dispatcher responded, "Copy that. Sending what we have to your terminal." Anthony's fingers moved quickly across the laptop keyboard, typing a message to his handler. "Officer actively investigating Westlake cover. Request immediate support." The response came back instantly. "Stand by. Incoming call." His phone rang seconds later. Anthony answered without speaking. "Reynolds, listen carefully," his handler said. "We've got a bigger problem." Taylor's search triggered an alert. He's not just a random officer, he's working with an FBI task force on something called Operation Lighthouse. They're investigating a weapons smuggling ring, and somehow your vehicle description got flagged in their system. Anthony felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "Are you saying my cover car is somehow connected to an FBI weapons case? That's what we need to find out fast, because right now, to Officer Taylor, you look like a suspect in his investigation. So what's the play?" Anthony asked, already knowing the answer wouldn't be simple. "We have two options. Extract you completely, burn the Westlake cover, and start fresh elsewhere." Or, his handler paused. "Or," Anthony prompted, "or we approach Taylor directly. Interdepartmental cooperation. Tell him enough to clear you while learning what he knows." Anthony considered this. He's ex-military. Rangers. That might give us common ground. "Your call, Reynolds. You're on the ground." Anthony thought about the way Taylor had looked at him, professional but with a hint of something else. The recognition of someone who sensed a kindred spirit. Maybe there was a third option here, one that didn't involve running or risking an operation. "I think," Anthony said slowly, "we might be looking at this from the wrong angle." Anthony stared at the police scanner as pieces of the puzzle started falling into place. "I think I know what's happening," he told his handler. "We might have accidentally stepped into the middle of something bigger." "I'm listening," his handler replied. "The weapons case Taylor's working on, what if our target is connected to it? We've been tracking the Donovan network for months. If they're moving weapons through this area, it would explain why my car got flagged." There was a pause on the line. "That actually makes sense. The operation zones would overlap. Exactly, Anthony said, feeling a second wind despite his exhaustion. So instead of running or confronting, what if we coordinate? Two agencies tracking the same target from different angles. It's risky. Interagency cooperation isn't exactly smooth sailing. Anthony nodded to himself. True, but so is having an FBI task force accidentally blow our operation because they think I'm a gun runner. His handler sighed audibly. All right, how do you want to play this? I need to talk to Taylor directly. Off the record, just him and me. I think he'll listen. Anthony remembered the officer's demeanor, professional but intuitive. He could have brought backup earlier, but chose to follow me alone. I think he's trying to figure things out before making any moves. If you're wrong about him, then I'm already compromised and we need a new approach anyway. After a moment of silence, his handler agreed. Okay. Limited disclosure only. Nothing about current operations or sources, just enough to clear your cover and explore potential overlap. Understood. I'll alert Director Chen. He'll want to know we're initiating contact with FBI. There was a hint of amusement in his handler's voice. This should make tomorrow's meeting interesting. Anthony hung up and considered his next move. Contacting a police officer who thought he might be a criminal required finesse. He needed neutral ground, somewhere public enough for safety but private enough for conversation. He sent a text message to the number listed in Taylor's file. Officer Taylor, we need to talk about Westlake and why you're following me. Riverview Diner, 30 minutes. Come alone or not at all. This is in both our interests. It was bold, but subtlety wouldn't work here. 15 seconds later, his phone buzzed with a reply. How did you get this number? Anthony smiled slightly. The same way you got suspicious about my car. We're both looking for the same people. 30 minutes. There was a longer pause before the next reply came. I'll be there, but I'm calling the shots. Fair enough, Anthony texted back. The Riverview Diner sat on the edge of town, a 24-hour establishment frequented by truckers and night shift workers. At this hour, it would be quiet but not empty, perfect for their needs. Anthony arrived early, choosing a booth in the back corner with a clear view of both entrances. Which agency? Taylor asked, his voice skeptical. I'm not at liberty to say yet, but I can tell you we've been monitoring the Donovan network for 8 months. Taylor's expression changed subtly, a flash of recognition quickly controlled. I never mentioned any names. You didn't have to, Anthony replied. But the fact that you recognize the name tells me I'm right. We're working the same case. The waitress returned with Taylor's coffee. Both men remained silent until she left again. Let's say I believe you're federal, Taylor said, stirring his coffee. That doesn't explain why your vehicle matches our BOO description. Because we're using similar models to blend in. Dark sedans with tinted windows are the preferred transportation of our targets. We adopted the same profile for surveillance. Taylor considered this. That's either the truth or a very convenient excuse. I can prove it, Anthony said. But not here, not now, and not without assurances that whatever cooperation happens goes both ways. You're asking a lot based on very little, Taylor observed. Anthony leaned forward slightly. 2 days ago, the Donovan network moved a shipment through the warehouse district. 4 SUVs, middle of the night. They transferred crates to a refrigerated truck heading north. Taylor's eyes narrowed. How do you know that? Because I was watching them. Just like I've been watching their operations for months. Just like I know they're planning something bigger next week. For the first time, Taylor seemed genuinely interested rather than suspicious. What's happening next week? Anthony shook his head. That's not how this works. I need to make a call, get proper authorization. If we're going to share intelligence, it needs to be official. And if I decide to bring you in right now, then you potentially compromise months of surveillance for both our agencies, Anthony replied evenly. And whatever's coming next week happens without anyone being prepared. Taylor took a long sip of his coffee, his eyes never leaving Anthony's. You military? The question surprised Anthony. Once. Why? Just curious. You carry myself a certain way. Taylor set down his cup. Make your call. You've got 5 minutes to convince me this isn't an elaborate play. Anthony nodded and stepped outside to call his handler, the cool night air a welcome relief from the tension inside. This was the turning point, either the beginning of cooperation or the end of his operation. Either way, there was no going back now. The night air felt cool against Anthony's face as he stepped outside the diner. His breath made small clouds in the darkness while he waited for his handler to pick up. "Tell me you haven't been arrested," his handler said by way of greeting. "Not yet," Anthony replied. "But I need authorization for limited disclosure. Taylor's willing to talk, but he needs confirmation I'm legitimate." "How much does he know already?" "I mentioned the Donovan Network. He recognized the name." Anthony lowered his voice as a truck driver walked past him toward the diner. "I think his FBI task force is tracking the weapons side while we've been following the money." His handler was silent for a moment. "Hold on." Anthony could hear muffled conversation in the background. He glanced through the diner window and saw Taylor watching him, coffee cup in hand, eyes never leaving Anthony's position. "Reynolds," his handler returned. "Director Chen has approved limited disclosure. Taylor checks out. His task force has been investigating arms trafficking for 14 months. Chen is contacting his FBI counterpart right now to establish formal channels. And in the meantime? In the meantime, you're authorized to share the Westlake operation basics and the connection to Donovan. Nothing about sources or methods. Nothing about next week's surveillance targets until we have official clearance." "Understood. And Reynolds, be careful. Even legitimate cooperation can get complicated fast." Anthony ended the call and walked back into the warmth of the diner. Taylor's eyes tracked him as he slid back into the booth. "Well?" Taylor asked, setting his coffee down. "I've been authorized to confirm that I work for the Central Intelligence Agency," Anthony said quietly. "My focus is financial tracking of the Donovan Network's international operations." Taylor's expression remained neutral, but his posture shifted slightly. "CIA? I expected FBI or DEA. The network has connections in 27 countries. Domestic agencies can't reach all the places we need to monitor." "And Westlake Industries? Legitimate company that provides cover for certain operations. The actual executives know about the arrangement." Taylor nodded slowly. "So the car? Same model the network uses, as I said. Makes surveillance easier when you blend in." Anthony leaned forward. "I can have my director call your supervisor to confirm everything, but it would be better for both our operations if we could handle this quietly for now." The officer studied him for a long moment. "You mentioned something happening next week. What exactly?" "I can't share specifics yet. My director is contacting FBI leadership to establish formal cooperation. Until then, I'm limited in what I can disclose." Taylor's jaw tightened. "That's not how this works. I need something concrete." Anthony considered his options. "Look, I can tell you what we know about past shipments. The network moved electronics through here 3 times in the past 2 months. Each time they used the same route, in through the Southern Highway, transfer at the Warehouse District, then north toward the Canadian border." "Electronics?" Taylor looked skeptical. "High-end components with dual-use capabilities. Military and civilian applications. The shipments are mixed, some legitimate, some black market." Taylor took a small notebook from his pocket and made a note. "And you're tracking the money, not the goods." "Exactly. We follow who pays, who gets paid, and where the profits go. It seems your task force has been tracking the physical shipments." "I didn't say that," Taylor replied cautiously. Anthony smiled slightly. "You didn't have to. But it makes sense. FBI domestic focus, our international focus. We're seeing different parts of the same operation." For the first time, Taylor's professional mask slipped, revealing genuine interest. "If that's true, combining intelligence could fill in significant gaps for both of us." "That's the idea." Taylor tapped his pen against the notebook. "You mentioned next week. Is it the same type of shipment?" Anthony hesitated. "Different. Bigger. More valuable and more dangerous. That's all I can say right now." "That's not much to go on." "It's all I'm authorized to share until we have official channels established." Taylor closed his notebook. "All right. I'll talk to my supervisor in the morning. If what you're saying checks out, we'll move forward with coordination." "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Taylor warned. "If anything doesn't add up, I'll personally make sure you're brought in for questioning, CIA or not. Anthony nodded. I understand. A comfortable silence fell between them as Taylor finished his coffee. When he spoke again, his tone had changed slightly. You said you were military before. Which branch? Army, Special Forces. You? Rangers. 2 tours in Afghanistan. Anthony nodded in recognition. Hunar Province? Something flickered in Taylor's eyes. How did you know? Just a guess. A lot of Rangers rotated through there during my time. Tough region. That's putting it mildly, Taylor said, a hint of shared experience in his voice. Were you there when the Korangal operation went sideways in 2009? Anthony nodded. 3 clicks away with the 3rd group. We heard it all over the radio. The tension between them shifted almost imperceptibly. Not gone, but different now. The wariness of 2 professionals mixed with the unspoken understanding of shared combat experience. Taylor checked his watch. I should go. Early shift tomorrow. Before you do, Anthony said, there's something else you should know. The warehouse manager at Eastern Storage might be involved. We've observed multiple meetings between him and Donovan's people. Taylor's eyebrows rose. Eastern Storage is on our watch list too. Been monitoring it for 3 weeks. Any chance we've been watching the same location without knowing it? Anthony asked. Possibly. Taylor stood up, leaving money on the table for his coffee. I'll be in touch tomorrow after I speak with my supervisor. Until then, don't leave town. Wasn't planning to. As Taylor walked toward the door, he paused and looked back. Reynolds, if you're playing me, I'll find out. And if that happens, not even your agency will be able to help you. Anthony met his gaze evenly. I'm not. Too much at stake for games. Taylor nodded once, then disappeared into the night. Anthony remained in the booth, stirring his now-cold coffee. The meeting had gone as well as could be expected. Now came the hard part, navigating the bureaucratic maze of interagency cooperation before whatever the Donovan network had planned went into motion next week. His phone buzzed with a text from his handler. Meeting set for 800 tomorrow. FBI Deputy Director Patterson, be ready to brief. Anthony texted back a simple, understood, before paying his bill and heading to his car. As he drove toward his apartment, he realized how the simple traffic stop had cascaded into something much larger. Sometimes, he thought, the most important connections happen by accident. Anthony arrived at the regional FBI office at 7:45 the next morning. Despite only getting 4 hours of sleep, he felt alert. Years of fieldwork had taught him to function on minimal rest when necessary. The security guard at the front desk checked his credentials carefully. They're expecting you in conference room B, 3rd floor. Anthony nodded his thanks and took the elevator up. When the doors opened, Officer Taylor was waiting in the hallway. Morning, Taylor said, now dressed in a suit instead of his police uniform. Sleep well? Well enough, Anthony replied. You? Barely. Spent half the night reviewing case files after our talk. Taylor gestured down the hallway. Everyone's already inside, just waiting on us. The conference room was larger than Anthony expected, with a long table surrounded by serious-faced men and women. He recognized his own director, Richard Chen, sitting on one side next to 2 other CIA officials. Across from them sat several FBI agents, along with a gray-haired man Anthony assumed must be Deputy Director Patterson. Agent Reynolds, Director Chen nodded. Thank you for joining us. I believe you've already met Officer Taylor. Yes, sir, Anthony replied, taking a seat next to his handler, who passed him a folder stamped Con Fi DNTL. Patterson leaned forward. Officer Taylor has briefed us on your encounter last night. Quite a coincidence, wouldn't you say? In my experience, sir, coincidences in our line of work usually aren't coincidences at all, Anthony said. That earned a small smile from Patterson, indeed. Well, after some discussion this morning, we've confirmed that both our agencies are, in fact, investigating the same network from different angles. The Donovan network has been on our radar for 18 months. Director Chen added, primary focus on financial operations and international connections. And our task force has been tracking their domestic weapons movement for 14 months, Patterson said. Until now, neither agency was aware of the other's operation. Anthony glanced at Taylor, who looked as surprised as he felt. That accidental meeting had exposed a significant intelligence gap between agencies. "So what happens now?" Anthony asked. "Now," Chen said, "we combine intelligence. Both operations continue but with full coordination." Patterson nodded. "Agent Reynolds, you mentioned to Officer Taylor that something significant is planned for next week. Care to elaborate?" Anthony opened the folder his handler had given him. 3 days ago, we intercepted communications indicating a major shipment arriving next Tuesday. Unlike previous shipments, this one contains specialized military-grade targeting systems removed from decommissioned aircraft, worth approximately $12 million on the black market. He pushed several photographs across the table. These components could significantly upgrade conventional weapons to near-military precision. "And we believe they're coming through my jurisdiction?" Taylor asked. "Yes," Anthony confirmed. "Following the same route as previous shipments, Southern Highway to the Warehouse District, then north toward Canada. The difference is the security. Our intelligence suggests at least 8 armed guards with the shipment." An FBI agent at the end of the table whistled softly. "That's a serious escalation." "It gets worse," Anthony continued. "The exchange is happening at Eastern Storage, the same warehouse both our teams have been monitoring." Taylor leaned forward. "That matches our intelligence. We've had the warehouse manager, Robert Wilson, under surveillance for weeks." "Our information suggests Wilson is actually working with us," Anthony said, sliding another photo across the table. "He's been feeding information to one of our assets." The room went silent. Taylor stared at the photo, then back at Anthony. "That's not possible," Taylor said slowly. "We have recorded conversations of Wilson arranging delivery schedules with Donovan's people." Anthony's handler spoke up for the first time. "Actually, we believe he's playing both sides, feeding us just enough to appear cooperative while still working with the network." "A double agent," Patterson mused. "Triple, technically," Chen corrected. "Working for Donovan, appearing to help us, and apparently involved with your operation as well." Taylor rubbed his forehead. "This just got a lot more complicated." "Which is precisely why coordination is now essential," Patterson said firmly. "If we move against Wilson too soon, we lose the shipment. If we wait too long, those components disappear into the black market." "So what's the plan?" Anthony asked. Chen looked at Patterson, who nodded. "Joint operation. We combine resources to intercept the shipment while apprehending the key network members." "Officer Taylor," Patterson continued, "given your knowledge of the local area and your role in bringing this to our attention, we'd like you to work directly with Agent Reynolds on the ground team." Taylor looked surprised. "Sir, I'm just a local police officer assigned to the task force." "With Ranger training and exemplary service," Patterson replied. "And more importantly, you've already established a rapport with Agent Reynolds. That kind of trust can't be manufactured overnight." Anthony glanced at Taylor, trying to read his reaction. Working together hadn't been part of either man's plan 24 hours ago when Taylor had pulled him over. "I'm willing if Officer Taylor is," Anthony said. Taylor hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, sir, I'm in." "Excellent," Chen said. "You'll both report to Agent Daniels for operational details." He gestured to a stern-looking woman at the end of the table. "She'll be running point on the joint operation." Agent Daniels stood up. "We'll need to move fast. 5 days isn't much time to plan an intercept of this magnitude." The meeting continued for another hour as they shared intelligence files, surveillance photos, and operational suggestions. Anthony was impressed by Taylor's insights on local geography and police response patterns. When the meeting finally ended, Anthony and Taylor walked out together. "So," Anthony said as they waited for the elevator, "from traffic stop to joint operation in less than a day. That's got to be some kind of record." Taylor gave a short laugh. "Not exactly how I expected my week to go." "Me neither," Anthony admitted. The elevator arrived, and they stepped in. As the doors closed, Taylor turned to him. "Why did you agree to work with me? You could have requested another agent with more federal experience." Anthony considered the question. "You know the terrain, you know the players, and when things went sideways last night, you were willing to listen instead of just making an arrest. That counts for something." Taylor nodded slowly. "Fair enough." Besides, Anthony added with a slight smile, I still owe you for not searching my trunk. That would have been awkward to explain. For the first time, Taylor smiled genuinely. I had my hand on my weapon the entire time you were reaching for that glove compartment, you know. I noticed, Anthony replied. That's why I moved very, very slowly. As they reached the lobby, Agent Daniels called out behind them. Taylor, Reynolds. First planning session at 1400 hours. Don't be late. They both turned and nodded. 5 days to prepare for a dangerous interception involving multiple agencies, armed guards, and millions in illegal military hardware. The simple traffic stop had turned into something neither man could have anticipated, a partnership that would test them both in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The night air felt thick with tension as Anthony checked his equipment one last time. 5 days of intense preparation had led to this moment. He sat in an unmarked van 2 blocks from Eastern Storage, surrounded by surveillance monitors showing different angles of the warehouse. "Comcheck," came Agent Daniels' voice through his earpiece. "Reynolds, in position," Anthony responded. "Taylor, ready," came the next voice. One by one, the 12-member Joint Task Force confirmed their positions. Anthony glanced at his watch, 11:42 p.m. According to their intelligence, the shipment would arrive around midnight. "Any sign of Wilson?" Anthony asked, referring to the warehouse manager they now knew was playing multiple sides. "Negative," replied one of the FBI agents. "His car isn't in the usual spot." Taylor's voice came through the earpiece. "I don't like this. Wilson has been present for every previous exchange." Anthony agreed. Something felt off. The past 5 days had been a whirlwind of activity, sharing intelligence, planning the operation, and getting to know the team. He and Taylor had spent hours together studying maps and surveillance photos, developing a rapport that surprised them both. "Movement at the south entrance," reported another agent suddenly. 2 SUVs approaching. Anthony switched his monitor to the south camera feed. 2 black SUVs with tinted windows pulled up to the loading dock, right on schedule. "Hold positions," Agent Daniels instructed. "Wait for the shipment confirmation before moving in." 4 men exited the first SUV, scanning the area with military precision. 2 carried visible handguns, while the others kept their hands near their jackets. The second SUV remained running, its occupants staying inside. "Those aren't the usual guards," Taylor noted. "Different posture, different movement patterns." Anthony had noticed the same thing. These guys have serious training, military or special forces background. 10 minutes passed. The men continued to wait, occasionally checking their phones. "Something's wrong," Anthony said. "The truck should be here by now." Just then, his phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number. "Deal moved. Wilson compromised. Check the north warehouses." Anthony's blood ran cold. "Daniels, we have a problem. I just got intel that the exchange location changed. They know about Wilson." "What's the source?" Daniels demanded. "Unconfirmed, but reliable," Anthony replied, recognizing the number as belonging to one of his long-term informants. Taylor cut in. "The north warehouses are a quarter-mile away. Abandoned paper mill complex." "This could be a diversion," warned one of the FBI agents. "Or our operation is blown," countered another. Agent Daniels made a quick decision. Split the team. Reynolds, Taylor, take 4 agents and check the north warehouses. The rest stay here in case this is a diversion. Anthony was already moving, Taylor falling in beside him as they hurried to their vehicle. 4 FBI agents joined them, weapons ready but concealed. "How did they know?" Taylor asked as they drove, lights off, toward the paper mill. "Wilson must have spotted something during the preparations," Anthony replied. "Or they have another source we don't know about." The abandoned paper mill loomed ahead, a massive complex of deteriorating buildings and rusted equipment. As they approached, Anthony spotted what they were looking for, a refrigerated truck parked behind the main building, barely visible from the road. "There," he pointed, "and look, 3 more SUVs on the east side." Taylor nodded grimly. The exchange is definitely happening here. They parked a safe distance away and approached on foot, using the darkness and scattered equipment for cover. When they were within 50 yards, Anthony could see men unloading crates from the truck while others stood guard. I count 8, no, 9 individuals, Anthony whispered into his comm. Armed guards watching while they unload the shipment. We're outnumbered, one of the FBI agents muttered. Not for long, Daniels responded. Backup is en route. 5 minutes out. Hold position and observe. Anthony turned to Taylor. We can't wait. Once those components are distributed to different vehicles, we'll lose half of them. Taylor studied the situation, then nodded. Agreed. We need to move now. He addressed the team. Standard containment approach. Wu and Patel, take the east side. Lopez and Gonzalez, west side. Reynolds and I will approach from the south. This is not authorized, Daniels warned through the comms. With respect, ma'am, we're losing our window, Taylor replied firmly. We're moving in. Backup can catch up. Anthony and Taylor advanced carefully through the shadows, using hand signals to communicate. Years of training had prepared them both for moments like this. When they reached the edge of the open area where the exchange was happening, they paused, waiting for the other agents to get into position. Ready when you are, came Lopez's whisper through the comm. Taylor looked at Anthony, who nodded. Go, Taylor ordered. All 6 agents moved simultaneously, emerging from different directions with weapons drawn. Federal agents, Anthony shouted. Hands where we can see them. For one frozen moment, everything stopped. The smugglers stood motionless, clearly surprised by the coordinated approach from multiple directions. Then chaos erupted. 2 guards reached for their weapons while others scrambled for cover. Anthony tackled the nearest guard before he could fire, driving him to the ground. Beside him, Taylor was engaged with another guard, both men grappling for control. Drop your weapons. Lopez yelled as she and Gonzalez cornered 3 men against the truck. Gunfire erupted from the far side of the clearing. Anthony heard Patel shout "Officer down" over the comms. Despite being outnumbered, the trained agents quickly gained the upper hand. Anthony subdued his opponent and moved to help Taylor, who had successfully disarmed his guard. Federal agents, freeze, came a new voice as the backup team finally arrived, flooding the area with agents and tactical officers. Within minutes, the situation was under control. 7 suspects were in custody, 2 were being treated for minor injuries, and 1 had escaped into the darkness. Agent Wu had taken a bullet to the shoulder but was stable. Most importantly, they had secured the entire shipment, 12 crates of military-grade targeting systems worth millions on the black market. Anthony found Taylor standing by the truck, catching his breath. That was too close, Taylor said, holstering his weapon. But effective, Anthony replied. Good call on not waiting. Taylor shook his head. I'm probably going to catch hell for countermanding Daniel's order. We both will, Anthony assured him. But the evidence is secured and most of the network members are in custody. That counts for something. Agent Daniels approached them, her expression unreadable. Officer Taylor. Agent Reynolds. That was either the most reckless or most effective field decision I've seen in years. Ma'am, Taylor began. Daniels held up her hand. Save it. Results matter. The shipment is secure, casualties were minimal, and we've dealt a significant blow to the Donovan network. She almost smiled. Sometimes field agents have to make judgment calls. This one paid off. Thank you, ma'am, Anthony said, surprised by her response. Don't thank me yet, Daniels replied. The paperwork on this will take weeks. I expect detailed reports from both of you tomorrow. As she walked away, Taylor looked at Anthony. Did she just compliment us while threatening us with paperwork? Welcome to interagency cooperation, Anthony said with a tired smile. Dawn was breaking by the time the scene was processed. The suspects had been transported for questioning, the evidence catalogued and secured, and Agent Wu taken to the hospital. Anthony sat on the hood of their vehicle, watching the activity wind down. Taylor joined him, offering a cup of coffee from somewhere. Thought you might need this. Thanks, Anthony said gratefully, taking the steaming cup. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sunrise. So, Taylor finally said, "What happens now?" Anthony shrugged. Debriefing, reports, probably some kind of interdepartmental task force to continue dismantling the network. I meant with you, Taylor clarified, back to undercover work. Eventually, Anthony admitted, but I think I might request a temporary assignment to this joint task force first. Seems like there's still work to do here. Taylor nodded, looking pleased. Good. Working with a CIA agent has been educational. Likewise with a local police officer, Anthony replied with a smile. Who would have thought a simple traffic stop would lead to all this? Speaking of which, Taylor said, reaching into his pocket, I never did write you that ticket for speeding. Anthony laughed. I think I've paid for it in other ways. As FBI agents finished securing the scene, Director Chen and Deputy Director Patterson arrived, looking surprisingly upbeat for the early hour. Gentlemen, Chen called out to them. Excellent work. Washington is very pleased. Both agencies are, Patterson added. In fact, we're discussing making this joint operation a permanent task force. Anthony and Taylor exchanged glances. I assume you're both interested in staying on? Chen asked. Yes, sir, they replied simultaneously. Good, Patterson said with satisfaction, because what started with a traffic stop might just change how our agencies work together going forward. As they walked toward the directors for a more detailed debriefing, Taylor nudged Anthony's arm. Next time you're driving through my jurisdiction, he said quietly, consider going the speed limit. Anthony smiled. Where's the fun in that? Besides, you never know what valuable connection you might miss. The sun climbed higher in the sky, illuminating the scene of their successful operation. A new day and a new kind of partnership that neither man had expected, but both had come to value. Sometimes the most significant journeys begin with the most ordinary moments, like a police officer stopping a speeding car on a quiet stretch of highway.